Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the McGill University's Dementia Education Program's Caring Conversations, another free community outreach initiative to provide virtual support to care partners of people living with dementia. I'm Claire Webster, founder of McGill University's Dementia Education Program. So we offer a very comprehensive range of free resources to educate and support persons living with dementia, family and informal caregivers, healthcare professionals, medical students, and the public at large. One of our most important resources is the Dementia Companion Guide, which can be downloaded for free. It's currently available in 8 different languages. You can also obtain a printed copy from Amazon at a cost of $20, and all proceeds go to support our program. I would also encourage the participants to look at our extensive library of McGill Cares webcasts and podcasts that are now, we've produced about close to 90 of them on all kinds of topics. And just have a look at our website, because I'm sure you'll find some very interesting resources to support you. So Caring Conversations is an initiative of our program, and it is supported by the Petro-Canada Caremakers Foundation. Today's topic is the positive aspects of caregiving. We'll talk about some research results on the positive aspects of caregiving, including the health and well-being benefits that it can bring, and talk about the value of acceptance on the caregiving journey. So I'm now pleased to introduce you to our hosts, Lucy and Joanne. Lucy Barylak is a social gerontology consultant for the CIUS, West Central Montreal. She's a graduate of McGill University School of Social Work, where she's also a liaison supervisor. She's developed evidence-based training for seniors and caregivers, and she lectures in the field of social gerontology and knowledge transfer. We also have Joanne Besner. She's an educator, professional coach, and caregiver. She received her Bachelor of Social Work and Master of Business Administration from McGill University. Her 35-year career in public community health in Quebec spans many roles, including frontline case manager, clinical supervisor, manager, researcher, and training. We will ask you if you could just please keep your microphones muted. We will unmute people as needed once we open the discussion. I would also like to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website for those people that are not able to attend live today. Take it away, and I'd like to introduce you to now Lucy.
Thank you, Claire, so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. You know, we have a very special program to share, which is a bit unique. Caregivers often feel like so much is out of their control, but that's not always the case. This program will focus on the positive aspects of caregiving and ways to take control of what is possible. You know, often our focus is to support caregivers by acknowledging the challenges they face with caregiving, and in no way are we discounting that. But sometimes it can be very hard to see a light at the end of the tunnel. Caregivers can often get caught up in focusing upon the things that are negative or difficult, and that is human nature. And today we're here to discuss all of the wonderful lights in the tunnel, not just at the end of one. You know that our thoughts influence our feelings, so it makes sense that reframing frustration in a positive way may help our emotions, and that's important to keep in mind. Research on caregiving has often focused on reducing the caregiver's burden, but far less attention has been given to promoting the positive aspects of caregiving. You know, many caregivers tell us that caring can be very rewarding, a way of giving back, or it's a sense of duty, or a promise that was made that they would really want to honor and feel good about doing it. So today, the purpose of our session is to focus on the positive, and there are many. We want to share with you some of the latest research studies on the positive aspects of caregiving for someone with dementia. In 2018, a study was published in the International Journal of Nursing Studies focused upon positive aspects of caregiving in dementia. This research looked at the findings of almost 4,000 articles on caregiving, of which only 40 articles related to positive aspects of caregiving. So they had 4 findings in that area. So for some, let me look at that with you now. So for some caregivers, there was definitely a sense of personal accomplishment and gratifications. For others, it was feelings of mutuality in a direct relationship. Basically, what it means is that there was empathy, meaning you are still a team. You're facing all the challenges together. The third one was an increase of family cohesion and functionality. And a lot of caregivers said that there's a sense of personal growth and purpose in life. The study also showed the importance of having personal and social affirmation of one's caregiving role, which is to mean that praise and recognitions of one's caregiving role and responsibility is really important in helping caregivers see the positive. So they have to see that in themselves also and acknowledge it. It is important that peers, other family members validate the role and the experience of caregivers, and that we do our utmost to support one another in this role. You know, as I'm talking, Joanne, it reminds me of your caregiving experience with your family. Can you share a little, because it really supports the research that I just spoke about?
Yes, Lucy, of course I can. And firstly, regarding family cohesion, what the research showed, it makes me think of specifically the pandemic when we were all so isolated. And caregiving together with my brother and sister, it really gave us an additional reason to meet on Zoom, to discuss our situation and share together. So we had to Zoom frequently, which inevitably brought us closer. And I'm not sure we would have met as often without that common theme. Your last line about supporting each other as caregivers, I think, is incredibly important. And I have to say, with my brother and sister, after we would meet together, and it wasn't always easy. We didn't always, see exactly eye to eye or be on the same page, but we always made a point at the end of each conversation, no matter what went on, to take a moment and say thank you to each other, to acknowledge, we were collaborating, we were in it together, we were a team, we used the word team, and we were really doing a good job together. So I'm curious if anybody else here has experienced anything similar, and if you're willing to share with us, we would so love to hear from you. Share the space with you, either in the chat or raise your hand. And so maybe Diane, you could watch out if anybody's ready to join in our conversation at any time.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to post any questions in the chat or to raise your hand on Zoom, and I'll be happy to call on you.
So while people are thinking about it, I'll kind of want to say my little piece. It's true about sort of the cohesion of functionality of families. I remember, even though I am an only child and was caring for my mother, I do have two children. And somehow that kind of brought us together a little bit closer, in the sense that we had a shared common interest of looking after my mother and after their grandmother as well. So there's something to be said about that. So while you're thinking about that, and you can always just put something in the chat if something resonates with you, let me talk about another study that was done in 2015 in the Gerontology, also on caregiving and dementia. They found that negative emotions and positive emotions go together in caregiving. It kind of makes sense. They suggest that you need to focus on positive thoughts rather than negative, which will then influence your well-being in general. Now, that makes an awful lot of sense, in a sense that if you're constantly thinking about the negative, it's hard to just move on. Now, Alzheimer's and dementia caregiving can be really tough, because you lose the relationship and the psychosocial bond with the person in many ways. As these diseases progress, there are lots of physical needs that the caregiver has to provide, in addition to managing the emotions around the relationship, along with everyday life and responsibilities. So we know that there are negatives and challenges, And the goal of our program and sharing of information is not to discount this at all. It's quite the opposite. This is part of the process of acceptance. Now, denial is one of the biggest hurdles that caregivers need to accept. Dementia is a confusing illness. There are good days, there are bad days, they change, they don't change. Caregivers tend to try and ignore the bad moments sometimes and hope that it's not as bad as it seems. But the reality is that dementia is a progressive disease. In 20, it is a something that we need to keep in mind and not have any denials around that.
Yeah, so I want to share another study that was done more recently in 2022, published by Aging and Public Health. And it looked at positive coping skills. And we want to share some concrete tips that they found to be helpful. You can follow along the slide with us. So number one, noticing positive events, really noticing. Being aware of the good things in your life as an antidote to focus on the negative. Also capitalizing on positive events. So this is a way of savoring it or milking it for everything you can. So besides the event, tell somebody about it. Call up a friend, a family member. Share about, a great book you read or a great show you saw or a wonderful moment with your care recipient. And also writing them down can be helpful so you can recall the event later. We talked about journaling, I remember way back in our first webinar, as a really helpful way to process what you're feeling. So it can be used this way too, to remember the good stuff. And number three, we look at mindfulness. So being aware of the present moment, accepting the reality of the now. This concept can be a bit elusive. Everybody's talking about mindfulness. But how does one really stay in the present and be mindful as a caregiver? Seriously, there are so many thoughts turning around in our head. What we have to do next, what's around the corner. So quieting our mind and practicing mindfulness is easier said than done. And for this reason, Lucy and I decided that for the next session in a month, we're going to take many of these strategies and go deeper and really take some time to do a bit of teaching on exactly how to do this. So number four, noting personal strengths, recognizing the personal resources inside you and the ones that are there as outside help as well. This can be a good antidote to feeling helpless. You have strength. Otherwise, you could not be in this role. So think for a minute, what are yours? Recognize them. Are you exceptionally patient, caring? Are you an organized person? Are you capable? Also, not doing it all alone and letting people support you also shows great strength. Gaining knowledge, like being here today. So ask yourself, what strengths are in you? What's coming out for you as you caregive? And number five, finally, is setting some attainable goals for yourself so you can feel good when you accomplish them. For example, just focusing on having a good day today. Another example might be being able to say no without guilt. That could be challenging, but it's a doable goal with practice. And of course, focus on the good things. Practice gratitude. Open yourself up to humor. So maybe instead of choosing the latest Netflix drama that your friend recommended, choose a comedy and let yourself laugh out loud. Spend time with positive people. Negativity is contagious, but so is positive energy. So choose wisely.
Thank you, Joanne. We have a couple of comments in the chat, if I may.
Great.
So the first comment, initially I felt a sense of accomplishment in assuming my role previously done by my spouse, but soon became just a job. My feelings about this fluctuate.
Well, you want to go for it, Joanne?
No, go ahead, Luce.
No, it's exactly what the research says. There's challenges and good moments, and it fluctuates back and forth, especially dealing with someone who has dementia and it's progressive. The whole idea behind this positive aspect is to be able to, to step back and measure, it's to measure it. Yes, there are challenges, but looking at the positive aspects of being able to manage certain situations. It's not easy, but it's almost a way, and we're going to talk a little bit more about it. I'm going to look into, so how do you actually do that? And so thank you for that. It is difficult, but it is doable.
I think also, it's like anything else. And I wonder if you agree, Lucy, in the beginning, things are new and we get a momentum going, and, we're going to tackle this disease. We're going to be a caregiver. We're going to do it. And the truth is, when the days progress and it goes on and on, sometimes we lose touch with that initial momentum. So we have to find ways to go back to the beginning and remind us about how important and meaningful the role is.
Thank you. Thank you for those great insights. So we have a question here. Can you say anything about any differences in dementia and Alzheimer's disease versus dementia and Parkinson's, and how these differences might change the nature of caregiving?
I might make a comment on that, and that is, I can't tell you exactly the different behaviors, but what I can say is I think it's important to focus, like we're talking about being in the here and now. I think it's important to focus maybe not as much on the name of the disease, but actually on what's going on in your life, what's happening with your person. Because even somebody who has Alzheimer's disease, there are so many different scenarios. Somebody who has Parkinson's, there are so many different scenarios. So I think just seeing what are the behaviors and coping with your reality is the best place to start, and using just all the tips and strategies that we are sharing in our webinars and that we're sharing today. Maybe you have an example of one, Lucy.
No, I totally agree with you. Information, educating yourself around the disease is important, but it's really, everyone is very different. And so just being aware of what is the behavior of the person that you're caring for, and how can you support them, and how can you deal with the situation that you're in.
Claire, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I think I'd just like to add that, in different types of dementias definitely manifest different types of behaviors. And so, for example, when we talk about, Alzheimer's type of dementia, Parkinson's type of dementia, it's often referred to as Lewy body dementia, where we see in a person often hallucinations, paranoia, a lot of waking up at night, acting out, which you see probably less in typical Alzheimer's disease. So the nature of caregiving definitely is different. What is important, however, regardless of the type of dementia, if you are noticing that behavior issues become extremely challenging, for instance, anytime there would be verbal aggression, physical aggression, or sexual aggression, it's very important to work with your doctor, because there are some medications that could manage challenging behaviors, right? So, depending on the type of dementia, if a behavior becomes very challenging and you do your best to try to, manage it on your own, sometimes it's just not possible. So, a lot of people still don't have proper assessments. They don't see doctors regularly, and they say, well, why bother if there's no cure? But it is important to work with a healthcare professional, because when these types of different behaviors do happen, there are certain types of medications that could try to manage this, because sometimes it just becomes way too much for the care partner. I hope I answered that question.
So Lucy, do you want to continue?
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Claire. Okay, so let's get back to our session. So how do we get there and practice what the research tells us is important for caregivers' well-being? I have to say the key factor is acceptance. Acceptance of the situation that you are presently in and what control it really is in your hands. So let's take a look at what is acceptance. Acceptance is necessary for your healing process. To practice acceptance, you must acknowledge all of the uncomfortable parts of yourself, your emotions, your thoughts, and your past. I want to share with you that caring for my mother was very challenging in many ways. But my turning point in my caregiving journey was when I finally accepted my mother for who she was at that time and realized that she was no longer the mother that I knew before. I accepted her limitations. When I did that, our relationship really changed and I became stronger in a way. My acceptance released me from all the negative feelings that were in my heart, and I was able to move forward in a positive way. She was still my mother, but not the mother that I knew before. Our roles changed, and I accepted the change, and I was just happy to still have her in my life. But what we both want to say today is we have heard your comments in previous sessions. We know that it's not the same when you care for a parent with dementia as for a spouse or a partner. So we hear you. Your couple life has been turned upside down, but there is the reality that the person is still there, but not the same person. The only control you have is how you accept this new reality. Something to think about.
Yeah. And, Lucy, it's just making me think it's so important to be able to get to the point you're describing. It's such a hard thing. And I also think it's also sometimes there's like a shift. You want to accept and you do. And then weeks or months later, you're back in that wishful thinking stage. Why couldn't it be like this? Why? I wish it wasn't like this. And so I find sometimes in my own experience, it's a bit of an up and down, a bit of a rock and roll thing to get to that point. It really takes a lot of strength and a lot of work. But I wanted, and the truth is, we don't, we're talking about being positive today and even regardless of the kind of dementia, the kind of, even an advanced illness, like Claire described, when you have the worst behaviors, what do we do when we just don't feel like being positive, when we're just not in the mood, when it's too big of an ask? What do we do?
That's an excellent question. We keep saying, and it's so important that first you need to acknowledge your feelings. And don't feel guilty about how you're feeling, no matter what thoughts are in your head. What's important is to understand where those feelings are coming from. It's okay to have a bad day. We're only human, okay? But we are talking about positive ways and tools of how to get there. So if possible, in that moment is where some self-compassion would be most appreciated. And yet it's not something many of us think about. Self-compassion can be an extremely positive habit to nurture that doesn't have to do with smiles we associate with positivity. Self-compassion is being warm and kind to ourselves, obviously to others as well, rather than feeling inadequate or self-criticizing and feeling like you're a victim. But it's okay to give yourself permission to feel sorry for yourself. I have to tell you, I give myself permission about one day, and it works. It really does. It's okay, but it should be time limited. That's the important piece. But however, if your feelings of sadness, feeling depressed, or just feeling negative persists, it's really important to recognize that if you cannot move forward, it may be time for you to get some help. So if you're constantly feeling like days go on and you're feeling down, you're feeling that you can't cope, please get some help. And we can talk a lot about where to get the help, but I would say start off by calling your doctor and really letting him know what's going on.
Really good guidance, Lucy.
I was just wondering, Joanne, just before we move forward,
Sure.
if anybody has any thoughts on what we're saying or challenges, challenges on what we're saying, or maybe you have an experience that you want to share with others in a positive way or whichever way you want.
We have a couple of comments in the chat. Claire, did you want to go ahead first?
Yeah, I mean, I think I loved what you both said about, noting personal strengths. I mean, when I was on my caregiving journey, the first 5 years, I was in a place of absolute anger, like just angry at everyone, everything. And it took a long time for me to get over the anger. But what I found was what was positive is that, 5 years into the journey, some of my other friends or people that I knew in the community started getting the diagnosis of their family member, and that they'd say, Claire, would you like to have a coffee? I'd like to pick your brain, what's been your experience? And I found that, at the beginning, I was looking at this whole experience as negative. But then when people started coming up to me and saying, could you share what you've learned? I realized, oh my goodness, I'm becoming an expert in this field. And it felt so good to share my experience with others. And I kind of was able to turn my thought process around and say, okay, I feel like I'm really out there, like learning. Every time I went to a hospital or anything, I'm really learning. I mean, it wasn't always easy, but I was learning. And what I put in the chat was that really what you're saying about acceptance, it's the most important factor, because the longer you stay in a state of denial, and saying, oh no, this is not happening, we're not there yet, I'm okay, you could potentially be sacrificing, quality of care of the person that you're caring for. And you're also sacrificing your own health and well-being, right? Most caregivers only ask for help when a crisis occurs, right? And so this is what they're talking about now, is the most important step to accept. I know you don't want to accept it, you want to be in denial, but you have to accept in order to provide quality of care.
And thank you for that, Claire, because it really validates the research that they're saying is that, to share those moments of positivity with others, as Joanne said, writing it down is it really is important, and maybe another little task to do. But I remember that I did keep a journal and try to put, once I accepted my mother for who she was in a positive way, to kind of look at it. And that made me really feel good. I have to say that it was not all doom and gloom. It was reality. And I had to accept what was facing me. I missed her, but I still loved her for who she was at that time. I'm just wondering if there's anybody else on the chat, or any comments that anybody else wants to make.
Yeah, there's a few comments. So here, I'll read this one. I think acceptance is key. As my husband gradually starts having problems or losing abilities, I also gradually let go of one thing at a time. I stopped getting irritable when he asks the same questions over and over, when he puts cutlery in the wrong places, when he comments on my driving.
Amazing. Thank you. That is so powerful, what you just said.
So I also want to chime in and say, let's practice what we're preaching, and kudos to you. What a great accomplishment, and your wording about letting go gradually. And that's encouraging to everybody here.
It is.
Thank you. So there's just a little further comment. This relates to the original discussion about, fluctuating feelings and relationships changing. So I'll just read this one. Sorry. One issue is that as one spouse starts being unable to do things and we take those over, is our own roles are constantly changing and flip-flopping. We want to continue to be a loving spouse, but it can fluctuate to feelings like being their nurse or administrative assistant, and it's hard to integrate those roles.
For sure. It really, really is. That's a very good point.
Yeah. Sorry, did you want to say something else, Lucy?
No, go ahead.
No, I just want to say, those putting on the new hat of caregiver just whenever possible, because we so want to keep our role of spouse, of partner. So any help that you're able to get, I just think it's really important to turn over some of the tasks that are most like nursing or most like caring, like and that you dislike the most, or that you feel aren't part of that spousal role, if you're able. Not everybody is able, but at least it helps you retain more of the role that you want to keep.
Absolutely. That's a really good point that you're making, Joanne. In my experience, and I think I've said it before, the nurse wanted to teach me how to give my mother insulin shots. And that's something that I couldn't do, you know. So what I'm trying to say, it's also important to know when to say no and to feel good about it and explain yourself why you're saying no. I couldn't be a nurse to my mom. I was her daughter. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just one more great suggestion. I'm thinking it would be a good idea to start support groups with a sharing of gratitude or a positive experience since the last time we met. What are your thoughts?
I love it. I think I really believe truly in positivity. And I know Joanne said something about, there's positive talk. And unfortunately, some people get caught up with other people who are going through difficult times and are not so positive. And it is contagious, and you feed off each other. It's okay to be supportive to each other, yes. But at a certain point, if it's a constantly negativity, it's going to overtake your whole life because there doesn't seem to be a light at the end of the tunnel. So try and engage with people who are more positive. And the fact, and before the session started, some of us were talking about laughter, the children laugh so many more times a day than we do.
Mm-hmm.
Laughing is so important. It creates certain hormones that actually lift your spirits and give you a sense of extremely well-being. So it's that balancing act. Yes, you are in a reality. How do I develop that positive attitude and bring it into my life and make it part of my daily routine?
Well said, Lucy. Anything else, Diane, before we continue?
No, nothing for now. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm going to leap on that, all this positive and really nice comments, and just say, and maybe from what you said about smiling, physically, we can even change our mood by being physical. It takes our whole self to caregive, our whole body, and we have to be in decent physical shape as well as mentally strong to be able to do this role. So we can't have a discussion like this without mentioning exercise, because exercise really is a great physical outlet, but it's also a mood booster, especially when it's done to music. And when caregivers are healthier and feel better about themselves, you've got a bigger reserve that you can draw upon, when you're caring for somebody else. So when we take care of our own health, we're showing up for ourselves and we're helping ourselves to be the best that we can. It also addresses the concern that so many of us have as caregivers, like we want to be around, we want to be healthy. What about our own health issues? So, sometimes we might feel anxious or fearful about our health, and we know, look, we do not have control over the end outcome, but the only thing we have control over is how we take care of ourselves. So unfortunately, there's no magic cure for the demands of caregiving, but the research does show that caregivers find relief and relaxation doing exercise. And really, we hear a lot about yoga these days. Even laughter yoga is a big one, meditation. And in Quebec, and as I'm sure across Canada in different provinces, there are several online and in-person programs from community organizations that you can get access to. Here in Quebec, there's Cumming Center, the Women's YMCA, Alzheimer's Society, Alzheimer Group, there's Apui. So take advantage. But if exercise and those kind of programs don't appeal to you, simply walk. So walking, as Lucy does, I'm revealing every single day, is another physical activity that doesn't require any equipment or any extreme exertion, but it can have really good health impacts. So even just starting as little as 10 to 15 minutes, a few times a week can really be beneficial. And then, oops. Okay, my finger's flipping here. Of course, the other side of it is what we put into our body. So nutrition is key. Eat power foods like nuts and berries and vegetables, and fruit. Avoid processed foods and junk foods, and of course, too much sugar. But did you know that most of us are chronically dehydrated? So dehydration can lead to headaches, poor balance, and fatigue. That doesn't help us in our caregiving. And also not just for ourselves, but for the person we're caring for, they can often be dehydrated, especially with dementia. They may not be able to tell you if they're thirsty, or they may just forget to drink. And this can lead to them having headaches and increased confusion, and even urinary tract infections and constipation. And that makes the symptoms of dementia even worse. So a good tip, have reusable water bottles around with straws for yourself, for your care receiver. And this is a great example of how you can practice healthy habits together.
Well, I see some things in the chat room, but I just want to talk about this. I just love this slide. It's the moments that count. Practice makes progress. We may not be able to create perfect, wonderful days for people with dementia or Alzheimer's, but we can create perfectly wonderful moments. And it would be interesting if you would take the time, just write down one happy moment with your care recipient each day or routinely. I just want to talk a little bit about that. You know, there's always this sense that everything has to be just right. When I was in charge of the Caregiver Support Center, we had a program in the drop-in. And so the caregiver would drop off the person they're caring for, and we would have activities and programs. And just sometimes looking at someone's face when a music was playing, to see the joy, the smile, the laughter, and a person who was so withdrawn sort of made everything worthwhile. So that's why I love this, because I actually saw it in reality every single day with different reactions of people who had quite advanced dementia. And it made the staff feel extremely grateful that you could give a person, no matter how long, it's maybe a moment, 5 minutes, whatever it is, of some happiness. And really, that's what it's all about. So that's why I just love this picture. So I think there were some chats on before we move to our next slide.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few links posted in the chat for different exercise programs that people might want to verify. And there's a lovely comment, just continuing on what you were saying, Lucy. My greatest pleasure is to hear my mother's laugh on the phone. Lovely comment.
Yeah, that is really, it sort of brings me back to my situation. Oh, thank you for that. So let's do a little exercise. I want to ask you a question, if we could, and if people are comfortable addressing that and sharing with us, because that's part of the beginning process of acceptance. So if you haven't thought about it, as a caregiver, I'm grateful for. So just think about that. And if you want to share with us, we would really appreciate it. I'll share with you a little bit later what I was grateful for.
Anyone wants to type an answer in the chat, I can read those out as well.
So in the meanwhile, Lucy, I wrote down and answered your question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's not surprising. I'm so grateful for my brother and sister, and that I'm not alone in the caregiving. That makes me really happy. And secondly, I'm grateful that I have, I don't know how to say it, aging parents. Not that I'm grateful for them aging, but I'm grateful to have them. I recognize many of my contemporaries my age don't have not even one parent. So that makes me grateful.
Thanks.
It's a lovely comment. I'm grateful for taking care of my mother as she did for me my whole life.
Yes, and that's really what the research, I'm going to go back because we really did a lot of research into this. There, a lot of caregivers feel that way, that they're grateful for giving back.
Yeah.
And then another comment, I'm grateful for being able, sorry, it just slipped. I'm grateful for being able to be there for my mother, even though we are 250 kilometers apart. Oh, here's another nice one. I'm grateful for the support and services available through the Cumming Center and the Constant Lethbridge Center. So really important to take advantage of different services that are out there to support you.
I think that's amazing, to be able to recognize that you're grateful that for the services that are available. We know that many times they're lacking, but because what it actually does, by you acknowledging what you're grateful for, it goes into the positive part of your emotional well-being. I see another one there.
Yeah, so I'm grateful for the special bond that I'm building with my mother. And Claire, did you want to share yours verbally?
Sure. I have to remember what I wrote there. I said, I was grateful to have had the strength and privilege to sit by the bedside to accompany both my parents to their next life as they brought me into the world. It was a very sad, but also very life-changing experience to witness the end.
Wow, Claire, that is very powerful. That is something to be grateful for sure. I see another one from Sherry.
Yeah, thanks. Great. It's really nice that everyone's sharing so much. I'm very grateful that my two daughters and their families live close and that they're very supportive. I love the relationship I have with them, and it's especially wonderful as my bond with my husband is going.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice.
Well,
thanks for sharing.
I'll share mine so while people can think about it. I have to say that I am very grateful that I was able to give my mother a good quality of life till the end, as best as I could. And talking about smiling, I swear, whenever she smiled, her whole face lit up. And that was an amazing feeling for me.
And is there something else, or I can share something, an article I saw last week? Is there anything else so far?
I think that's it for the chat for the moment. Thank you.
So, and I'm just going to invite, if anyone wants to talk and speak up, we're just reminding you, this is Caring Conversations, but I did see, I don't know if anyone who lives in Quebec or gets the Montreal Gazette saw this article. It was from last week. And there were some really poignant pieces and that relate to today. And just the title is Driven by Love, Family Caregivers Pushing Past the Point of Burnout. And a lot of the article talks about her challenges. This young caregiver, Morgan Bushbaum-Lupovich, and she was a young caregiver of 25 years old. So we don't spend enough time talking about young caregivers. And here's a picture of her and her mom. And just somebody in the chat mentioned about resources. So I just want to read what she had written. Two things I want to share. So she says, initially she struggled as she tried to find reliable and experienced care providers. She hired and dismissed more than a dozen. But finally, she was able to find two care providers who were wonderful and who made me believe the world is an okay place. They were with us for a year. Without them, I could not have coped. And her most poignant talk is, or what she says is, for Morgan, the role of caregiver was at times gratifying. It was as if her mother were an extension of her body. I quote, I just felt what she needed. I felt it. It was also the hardest thing I have ever done. So I thought that was really moving.
I also want to let you know that, in my early days as a frontline social worker in a home care department, I went to see a couple that the husband had very progressed dementia, and there wasn't much of an interaction between the couple, only the care that she gave him. And I asked her, I said, what did you do in the past? And she said to me, oh, we used to love to go dancing. And I said to her, in those days, we still had recordings that you could actually put in music. And I said, so what kind of music? And I said, do you have something that maybe you could kind of listen to right now? And she was surprised. And yes, so she went and did. All of a sudden, out of nowhere, this gentleman was sitting on the couch. He got up and he walked over to his wife and he placed his hands where they should be. And they started to dance. So what I'm saying is that, yes, you lose the person in many ways, but try to find some bonds that you had together. And I always talk about my mom. I did her nails and I did her hair because that's where she was at that time. And that bond was. So there's a lot of positivity that we can find. We just have to allow ourselves to the opportunity to look beyond all the difficulties and the challenges that are facing caregivers daily.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we can think it's a tough ask. What? Come on, look what I'm going through. You might be thinking, how can you sit here and ask me to be positive? I'm not happy that, this is my lot in life, and that's the challenge. And you know what? The challenge is also to find in you what can you grow in yourself? Because this illness, because of it, because of where you find yourself, what new strengths, what new abilities can you develop in yourself that you never thought you could? So maybe that's something that can bring some thought.
Claire, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I want to talk about, the importance also of setting boundaries. I work with a lot of family caregivers, and I was very bad at setting boundaries, right? We always say it's almost like caregivers don't want to give themselves permission to have a life, meaning, oh no, I can't go out and see my friends because I got to take care of my husband, or I can't go on vacation with my family because I've got to take care of my mother. And last night I was giving this talk with a current caregiver, and her daughter was there, and her daughter said, we must have said goodbye to my grandmother multiple times, but my grandmother never passed away. But I've lost my mother. There were so many trips that my mother didn't come on, and I remembered the same thing. I wouldn't travel with my family because I was so afraid that while I was gone, if something would happen. And I think that it's really important to give ourselves permission to have a life and set boundaries. Where as the disease progresses, sometimes you have a family member who may call you 5-10 times a day. And at some point, like that's not okay, right? They can't, they will, that's part of the illness and they call you, but you have that permission to go out for that walk. You have permission to go and have coffee with a friend or dinner with friends. And, if you don't set boundaries, you're going to burn out. And I think we have a very hard time, like giving ourselves permission to take care of ourselves. And again, it often takes a crisis to happen to our own health before we say, okay, now I've got to change something. But why do we wait for that crisis to happen? Right? We shouldn't have to wait.
Thank you, Claire. I think there was something on the chat.
Yeah, let me read this out. The story about the man dancing reminds me that physical touch, non-sexual especially, can reduce stress hormones in both the caregiver and the recipient. Hugs, a hand on the shoulder or the arm. Yeah, very nice. There was an excellent webinar yesterday about redefining intimacy in Parkinson's that emphasized how important physical touch is for couples that require a lot of negotiating, but the benefits are worth it. Nothing like a good hug. Agreed.
Yeah, that's what it is. That's what the whole idea of looking at the positive aspect. How do we reach each other? How do we still connect? And I always say that caregiving is really a balancing act. It's not, one does not outweigh the other. There are two people in this relationship, sometimes even 3 and 4. And each person's needs are important. And how do you balance that? And what Claire said is also setting limits, obviously. So our caring conversations, the topics that we choose, and we kind of want to make sure that we are allowing caregivers to express their feelings, and no matter what they are, we're giving you permission. It's okay to feel as you do. However, I just want to emphasize that if the negative feelings outweigh the positive feelings, you really should be able to recognize that and get the support that you need.
I love what Suzanne wrote about the physical touch, and especially about hugging. And I think we have to remind ourselves of, our care recipients' needs are no different than our own. We all need hugs. And I feel like we so easily hug children, and we forget that as we get older and older, and especially with COVID, I think yesterday I saw someone for the first time. No, not for the first time during the pandemic, but for the first time we hugged. And I said, it's so nice to hug you. And there is something about embracing, and that is, nothing can replace physical touch. So thank you, Suzanne, for reminding us and for mentioning that in the chat. It's very, very important. We'd love to hear from others. We're having a nice conversation though between ourselves. You know what? Actually, maybe I'll just take one opportunity here. I'm starting to act like my grandmother. So my grandmother, whom I also had the pleasure of being a caregiver for, every time I visited her, I don't know if this resonates, she would give me a ton of articles. And now I find I'm that person grabbing articles. But this is a great newsletter that actually my husband receives. It's the Mayo Clinic Health Letter. And I know, Diane, you're very good at seeing if this is online, but this edition from February 2023, coincidentally, is a special report, a supplement on caregiving, and it's got quite a few pages. And it's got a little paragraph at the end that I think is meaningful, and we'll see, maybe we'll end on this. Some caregivers discover how their situation brings new meaning to life. You may discover qualities you never knew you had, such as resilience and humor, even in the most challenging of times. But they talk a lot about hope. You may find hope by supporting and mentoring others, just like Claire talked about, who are experiencing similar difficulties, or by advocating for laws or research funding. The key to renewing hope may lie in nourishing relationships that support and energize. It may lie in self-care practices and living each day believing that acceptance is not about giving up or liking the current circumstances, but in making peace with them. You may need to seek out or create your own source of hope, but it is out there.
Beautiful. That says it all, Joanne. That's what we're trying to convey in our session today.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Claire. I see
Well,
you're.
I was just gonna say, what's so important, and this is one of the reasons why I founded this program at McGill, was because, for me, education is so important. And I guess I was stuck in a state of anger for such a long time, because I didn't understand what was going on, right? I didn't understand how to take care of my mother. I didn't understand why she was behaving. I didn't understand the resources that could help me. And education plays such an important role, because the more educated you are and the more you understand, and the more prepared you are, or being one step ahead, or participating in webinars like this, or reading our Dementia Companion Guide, or listening to other webcasts, it's knowledge is power. And oftentimes people are stuck in anger or misery because they just don't understand. They don't know where to get those resources. They don't know how to get the help. So education plays a very powerful role. And I would really, encourage everybody to try to be one step ahead at all times, so that you feel prepared, right? Because if you don't feel prepared, that's when all that anxiety and anger and frustration comes in, right? But if you're prepared, so if the person is in the first stages of the disease, find out what's going to happen in the middle stages. If they're in the middle stages, start thinking about what's going to come in the later stages, and have a plan. But if you're in that state of denial that a lot of people say, well, I don't want to talk about that yet. We're not there yet. I don't want to talk about it. Well, you have to talk about it, right? Because especially with dementia, you have to be ready for what's to come. And the only way to do that is to really be educated.
Thank you, Claire. We do have a question in the chat. It kind of relates to when you are no longer a caregiver because your parent is transferred to a long-term care facility, finding it difficult to adapt to the transition. Do you have any advice on how to deal with this change as a caregiver? This is for her parents who were recently moved to a long-term care facility.
So the question is that this person is having a hard time accepting? Is that
just like, I guess if you've gone from looking after your parents and being their full-time caregiver, and then they're placed in a facility, suddenly all that responsibility is gone.
Well, that goes along with all the things that we're always saying, that you cannot lose yourself. We did have a session about that, about being able to still have a life of your own and create that. Mm-hmm. So it is a loss. There's no doubt about that. But I don't know the circumstances, but we find through research and our own experience that caregivers, you're still a caregiver, even though the person is no longer in your home. Mm-hmm. You are, you're still their advocate. If it's easy and you're able to do visiting, socializing, being in contact, making sure that the person is being well taken care of. So, and then looking at where you are, accepting that person is there and they are being taken care of, hopefully well, with all their needs. So what can I do for myself now? Okay, my life has opened up all of a sudden. Is there something that I couldn't do before when I was caring for my parents at home? Is there a hobby I'd like to take up? What can I do for myself right now? So I hope that that's helpful. I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, and the key thing, I love what you said, Lucy. You're still a caregiver. The difference is you're not on your own turf anymore. So it brings about a lot of changes and need to adapt. But maybe because our topic is on positive aspects, you actually gain a possibility of being part of a new community of caregivers who are also there at whatever residence or home you're in. So that's one thing you can explore. There's also user committees, and it's a great opportunity to get involved with the home, if you want to have a say, and to really get to know the staff and find your way.
And I think it's probably also difficult. Not difficult. There's a difference between being a daughter or son as a caregiver. So like when my mother was placed, like you said, Lucy, I felt a sense actually of relief a bit because I wasn't always constantly worried day in, day out. And versus when you're a spouse and your spouse has been placed, and that's much more difficult, I would think. But again, it's all about setting those limits and boundaries. We oftentimes see spouses who'll go and want to spend like 4 or 5 hours a day there and not give themselves permission to have some time for yourself. And it became where even myself at the beginning, I felt I had to go every day, but then I gave myself permission to say, no, I'll go every second day and then every third day. So it's just about, and as long as you have the trust in the people that are taking care of your loved one, which is difficult with the healthcare system, right? It's not everybody's trained, but as the daughter of someone, I was feeling a little bit of sense of relief. I had more time and space for myself.
Well, that's exactly what I was saying to that person who asked the question. Now is the time. What can I do for me? How can I enhance my life, the things that I couldn't do? And as Joanne said, nothing stopped. You're still a caregiver and you can be involved as much as you want. And try and stay positive. I had to throw that in. I think there was something on the chat, Diane.
I just posted the link for past episodes of Caring Conversations in case anyone wants to refer to those.
Mm-hmm. So we've come to our time. I'd like to thank Joanne and Lucy very much for hosting today's event and for all of you who are participating. And, it's really very meaningful to us to have the privilege to come into your homes and to be there to support all of you. So thank you for joining us. Next month's Caring Conversation will be about using positive intelligence to cope with caregiving challenges. Joanne and Lucy will talk about how we can mute the voices in our head that generate negative emotions that can interfere with our ability to manage difficult situations. They will offer tools to favor resilience and help identify our triggers so we can respond constructively to challenging situations. It will be on Tuesday, March 28th at 11 a.m. So please look for the registration link, which will be sent to you, as well as it will be available on our website at mcgill.ca/dementia early next week. Finally, since this is a pilot project, we would like to know how Caring Conversations works for you. We will send you a very short evaluation form by email. Please fill it out as soon as possible so that we can see what works and what does not. Once again, I would like to acknowledge that Caring Conversations is supported by the Petro-Canada's Caremaker Foundation, and it is also an initiative of the McGill Dementia Education Program, which is funded by private donations. If you would like to join our mailing list to be notified about upcoming programs and resources, please email us at dementia@mcgill.ca. Thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your feedback. Be well, stay positive.